There's a quiet ache that comes when you realize you've been disappearing in someone else's story. It doesn't happen all at once. It begins with small compromises, silent withdrawals, the sweet surrender of wanting to be loved. And before you know it, you can't remember the last time you heard your own voice clearly. It's not that the love was false. It's that you mistook fusion for intimacy. You gave your heart, but somewhere along the way, you misplaced yourself. I think we've all stood in that shadow before, the moment when a relationship becomes the place you go to disappear, instead of a space where you return to yourself more fully. Maybe that's why Jung's work cuts so deep, because he didn't offer cute advice on compatibility or five-step tricks to find the one. He dared to suggest that love isn't meant to complete us, it's meant to awaken us. But awakening is rarely comfortable, especially for women taught to find safety in softness, in caretaking, in becoming smaller so love feels bigger. There's a particular kind of sorrow that comes from realizing that shrinking didn't make you more lovable, it just made you easier to carry. I remember once being so enamored by someone that I unconsciously began orbiting their world like a moon desperate for light. My favorite songs became his. My free time dissolved into his calendar. And when I was alone, I felt hollow. At first, I told myself this was love, that merging was magic. But what I had mistaken for closeness was actually a slow erasure. It wasn't his fault. It was the part of me that still believed love required vanishing. Carl Jung would have called this a failure of individuation, the process of becoming truly yourself, even in union. He believed love shouldn't demand we shed our identity like a skin. If anything, it should challenge us to wear it more boldly. But most of us weren't taught that. We were taught that devotion is sacrifice, that the more we dissolve, the more worthy we are. And so many women fall into relationships that feel like warm cages. The bars are made of affection, but they're still bars. You start avoiding your own needs, not out of fear, but out of habit. You start confusing peace with passivity. And the worst part? It often looks like harmony on the outside. You laugh at his jokes, you smile in photos. You say you're fine, but inside, you've grown silent with yourself. What Jung suggests, and what smart women come to understand, is that losing yourself doesn't make the love stronger, it makes it more fragile. Because what's being loved isn't fully you, it's a version of you edited for easier consumption. And deep down there's a heartbreak in that. Not the heartbreak of a breakup, but of self-betrayal. It's subtle. It's the way you pause before speaking, just to make sure your opinion won't rock the boat. It's the way you stop dreaming aloud because your dreams no longer fit into the space you share. It's not just that you lose your preferences, you lose your reflection. The relationship becomes a funhouse mirror, showing you what you think they want to see, not who you really are. And when that mirror finally cracks, when something in you whispers, "Wait, where did I go?" you're left staring at the emotional debris of a connection that wasn't built on wholeness, but on mutual illusion. That's the moment many women wake up, sometimes softly, sometimes in the wreckage of something beautiful that couldn't hold the weight of your silence anymore. And in that awakening comes a deeper question. What if love is not about merging, but about meeting someone as your whole self, letting them see you, messy, growing, unapologetic, and seeing them the same? But to meet someone like that, you have to reclaim the parts of you that you gave away. And that reclamation begins with noticing the stories you've internalized about what love is supposed to feel like. We're so quick to label intense emotions as romantic destiny. That ache in your chest, that obsessive longing, that sense that this must be fate. What if that's not love? What if that's projection? Jung called it the phenomenon where we unconsciously plaster our inner longings onto another person. We don't see them, we see our own reflection in their outline. It's a powerful illusion. especially when we've spent years suppressing our own needs and qualities. Suddenly, someone walks in and embodies everything we've disowned, and we fall in love not with them, but with the possibility of touching what we've lost in ourselves. It's wild, isn't it, how often we chase someone not because they are the answer, but because they remind us of the parts of ourselves we've abandoned, the boldness we buried, the desire we muted, the freedom we secretly crave. And when they disappoint us, when the high fades and their humanness shows, we feel betrayed, not because they changed, but because the mirror cracked. I've felt that shift. That moment when the person who once felt like salvation now feels like confusion. When the traits you adored become the ones you resent. He was so confident, now he's arrogant. So spontaneous, now he's unreliable. But what if the truth is, he didn't change, your projection did? Smart women learn to recognize this pattern, not by shaming themselves, but by getting curious. What if the confidence I loved in him was something I'm afraid to own in myself? What if the emotional chaos he brings isn't entirely his? What if it's touching a wound in me that's been there far longer? These are uncomfortable questions, but they are the questions that turn infatuation into insight, that help us stop reaching for completion in another and start reconnecting with the exiled parts of our own psyche. And here's the paradox. The more you reclaim those parts, the less desperate your love becomes. You stop needing someone to play the role of your rescuer or your motivator or your emotional savior. You start seeing them as they are, not as a fantasy, not as a filler, but as a flawed, real person. And in that realness, a deeper kind of intimacy becomes possible, one not based on illusion, but on presence. The work is slow. It's tender. It might feel like grief at first. Letting go of the dream of what you thought love should look like. Letting go of the version of you who needed someone else to be her missing piece. But what you find in that letting go is yourself. And from that self, love becomes something entirely different. Not a rescue, not a mirror, not an escape, but a sanctuary. A place where you are not asked to shrink, but invited to expand. That's where we begin. In the noticing. In the soft revolt against patterns that once felt like love, but now feel like self-abandonment. In the moments of quiet defiance when you choose your truth, even if it means standing alone for a while. That is the beginning of loving not just another, but loving wisely, from the inside out. And when that begins, something else starts to stir. A strange, sacred courage. Not loud, not dramatic, but steady. The kind of courage that whispers, I don't have to disappear to be loved. Sometimes love doesn't break you. It simply reveals the cracks you didn't know were already there. It holds up a mirror not just to the beauty in you, but to the jagged edges too. The ones you've tried to hide behind kindness or cover with competence. But in love, there's no hiding. At least, not for long. That's the strange gift of intimacy. It exposes everything. The tenderness, yes, but also the unresolved. The memories you thought were buried. The fears you thought you'd outgrown. And especially, the parts of yourself you promised to never show again. The ones that feel too much, too needy, too dark. Jung called that the shadow, the unclaimed, unintegrated side of the self. The one we deny, but that always finds a way to speak. In relationships, the shadow doesn't whisper, it roars. You think you're just mad that he didn't text back, but what's really trembling underneath is the 8-year-old you who once felt forgotten. You think you're just jealous of the woman he smiled at, but really, it's your self-worth begging to be seen. The shadow doesn't show up politely. It throws tantrums, it panics, it clings, or worse, it goes silent. And we're tempted to point the finger outward, to make the other person the villain in the story. But if we pause, If we get still, something softer emerges. A question we've avoided asking. What is this reaction really about? That question can change everything. It's not about blaming ourselves. It's not about excusing someone else's harm. It's about becoming emotionally literate enough to say, yes, that hurt. But what else is this pain trying to tell me? Smart women learn to sit with that discomfort, not because they enjoy suffering, but because they understand the sacredness in it, the wisdom hiding in the wound. Shadow work in love is brutal and holy. It asks us to look at what we've exiled, the anger we've suppressed to stay lovable, the ambition we've denied to avoid seeming too much, the sexuality we've tucked away to be safe. These disowned parts don't vanish. They leak out, often in the form of resentment or obsession or detachment. We accuse our partner of being distant, but sometimes it's us who's disconnected first, from ourselves. I once dated someone who was emotionally unavailable, the kind of man who disappears just enough to keep you chasing. At first, I blamed him. I called it avoidant attachment. I studied the patterns. But when I got honest with myself, I realized I had been emotionally unavailable to myself. I had been abandoning my needs, dimming my light, outsourcing my worth. And in some twisted way, his absence mirrored mine. That's the terrifying beauty of relationships. They reflect not just our longings, but our blind spots. The woman who envies her outspoken friend might be grieving her own silenced voice. The one who's triggered by a confident lover might be aching for permission to own her own power. The trait we despise in someone else often marks the place we've been told to keep small. When we start to see that clearly, something begins to shift. The triggers don't vanish, but they lose their grip. We start asking different questions. Not, why is he like this, but what part of me is being asked to rise? Not, why can't I fix this, but what wound in me is trying to be seen? It's slow work, sometimes boring, sometimes excruciating, but it's the work of becoming whole. And it's not about fixing ourselves for love. It's about loving ourselves enough to stop looking for someone else to do the fixing. Smart women become alchemists. They turn conflict into curiosity. They notice the patterns not just in their partner's behavior, but in their own responses. They keep a journal. They watch how jealousy shows up. They ask where it began. They pause before reacting, not to repress the feeling, but to explore it. This is emotional maturity. Not perfection, not constant calm, but the ability to hold your own chaos without projecting it onto someone else. And ironically, when you begin to do that, when you stop demanding your partner soothe every insecurity, you begin to feel safer. Not because they're more available, but because you are. You become the safe place. You stop making someone else responsible for your emotional weather. And in that groundedness, a different kind of love becomes possible. It's no longer about being adored. It's about being met. And the ones who meet you like that, they don't always come wrapped in the packaging you expect. Sometimes they're not the loudest or the flashiest, but they're steady, clear, challenging in a way that invites your growth, not threatens your worth. Jung saw relationships not as final destinations, but as mirrors for transformation. Love to him wasn't just about companionship, it was about awakening, about becoming. And that requires choosing people who don't just make you feel good, but who make you grow. Not through cruelty or chaos, but through presence, through honest reflection, through emotional generosity. But here's the catch. Growth rarely feels good in the beginning. The partner who challenges you to speak up when you've been quiet all your life might feel intimidating. The one who won't let you play small might feel annoying. The person who sees your potential might scare you more than the one who pities you. Comfort can be dangerous. It lulls us into old patterns. It lets us coast. But smart women eventually realize that peace without depth is just numbness in disguise. They stop falling for the charming but emotionally vacant ones. They stop idealizing the lovers who make them feel needed but never truly seen. They stop choosing safety over selfhood. Because they've learned the relationships that heal you are not always the easiest. They're the ones that ask for all of you, the ones who see your shadow and stay, the ones who welcome your voice even when it trembles. And they don't always arrive wrapped in butterflies and fireworks. Sometimes they show up quietly, with honest eyes, with gentle mirrors. You'll know it by how you feel when you're alone after being with them. Not anxious or emptied, but expanded, like your soul just got a little more room to breathe. And maybe that's the truest measure of love, not how enchanted you feel in their presence, but how much closer you are to yourself because they came into your life. That kind of love doesn't rescue, it reflects. It reminds. It says, you don't need to become anyone else, just come home. But to choose love like that, you have to be willing to walk away from what looks good but feels hollow. You have to be willing to tolerate the discomfort of honesty, the awkward pauses, the growing pains, the moments when being seen feels scarier than being adored. Because the ones who challenge you, they won't flatter your illusions. They'll invite you into your truth. And that is both a blessing and a test. Are you willing to be loved as you are, not as you pretend to be? Are you ready to stop performing and start revealing? It's not easy, but it's worth it. Because in that kind of relationship, you don't feel like you have to earn your place. You don't have to hide your hunger. You don't have to dim your fire. You just get to show up. And every time you do, something softens. The old stories lose their grip. The fear begins to fade. And love, real love, starts to feel less like a battlefield and more like a beginning.
It's easy to believe love is something that happens to us, that it arrives unannounced and sweeps us into its rhythm like a song we didn't choose but somehow already know. But what if love isn't just an event, it's a path? What if the deepest kind of love isn't something we fall into, but something we rise with? There's a quiet revolution in learning to love without losing yourself, in choosing partnership not from longing, but from wholeness. It doesn't look dramatic. It doesn't always feel like the fairy tales taught us. It's often quiet, steady, and surprisingly spacious. Jung once said that the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there's any reaction, both are transformed. But here's the part most of us forget. Not every reaction is an explosion. Sometimes it's a slow unfolding, a soft illumination, a truth revealed in pieces, not all at once. In that kind of love, you're not trying to be saved. You're not trying to be fixed. You're simply walking side by side with someone who sees your becoming as something sacred. They don't hold you back. They don't fill your silence with noise. They sit with you there, not rushing you to heal, not asking you to change to be easier to love. They trust that who you are, right now, is enough. This love doesn't demand constant reassurance. It doesn't feed on drama. It doesn't leave you guessing. Because it isn't based on need. It's rooted in presence. And you'll notice the difference not in how much they chase you, but in how grounded you feel when you're with them. There's no pressure to perform, no urgency to disappear.
You're allowed to keep your voice, your solitude, your boundaries. You're allowed to be you. It feels strange at first to not be consumed, especially if you've been conditioned to equate intensity with meaning. But over time, you start to crave that kind of peace, that kind of clarity, the love that doesn't erase you, but reflects you back to yourself more clearly. And what you begin to see in that mirror is wholeness. Not perfection, not completeness, but wholeness. The return to yourself after years of searching outside of you. Jung believed love could be alchemical, that through it we are refined, not because someone else reshapes us, but because in the safety of true connection, our hidden parts feel safe enough to emerge. The real work of love, then, isn't about merging, it's about meeting. And in that meeting, transformation becomes possible. I think the most beautiful relationships are the ones where you are not asked to choose between yourself and the other, where loving someone doesn't mean disappearing from your own life, where you can say, "I choose you," without it meaning, "I abandon me." In those relationships, silence is not emptiness. It's space to breathe. Arguments are not battles. They are bridges. Solitude is not distance. It's nourishment. And when you hurt, you don't panic. You don't spiral because you know pain isn't a threat to the bond. It's a teacher. It's an invitation. It asks, what in me is being touched right now? And what does it want to say? Smart women begin to see that even conflict is a form of intimacy, that being challenged is not rejection, that being seen is not unsafe. They learn to stay, to soften, to speak. They learn that they don't need someone to complete them. They need someone to walk beside them, to witness, to grow, and to remind them on the days they forget that they were never broken in the first place. And it's not that they stop needing love, it's that their need changes. It becomes quieter, but deeper, less frantic, more rooted, less about escaping loneliness and more about expanding presence. They stop chasing love that feels like rescue missions, and they start opening to love that feels like co-creation, a slow building, a shared becoming, two whole people, side by side, not blending into each other, but blooming beside each other. That's the paradox, isn't it? The more you become yourself, the more room you have to love. Real love doesn't require you to shrink. It asks you to show up, fully, unapologetically, as you are. It doesn't mean every day is perfect. It doesn't mean every partner will be right. But it means that even when it hurts, even when it ends, you don't lose yourself again, because you've come home. And once you've returned to that inner ground, no relationship can uproot you. You begin to see love differently. You stop asking, will they choose me? And start wondering, can we grow together? You stop fearing the end and start honoring the process. You stop clinging and start listening. And you start saying no, not out of fear, but out of wisdom. You say no to the connections that make you feel small, to the dynamics that trigger your wounds but don't respect your healing, to the patterns that keep you looping through versions of yourself you've outgrown. Because now you know what love feels like when it's real. Not perfect, but real. Rooted, reciprocal, requiring honesty, not performance. And you become more honest too. Not just with them, with yourself. You admit when you're scared, when you're slipping into old stories, when you're shrinking. And you catch yourself. Not every time, but more often. And you return to truth, to voice, to self. That's the real gift. Not just finding someone who gets you,
but becoming someone who refuses to leave yourself behind. No matter who you love, no matter how good it feels, no matter how strong the pull, you stay with you. And in that staying, love becomes less about possession and more about presence, less about merging and more about meeting, less about losing yourself in someone and more about finding yourself again and again beside them. This is how smart women love. Not with fear, not with masks, but with open eyes and steady hands, with curiosity instead of control, with presence instead of projection. They understand that the most important relationship is the one they have with themselves, and every other love simply reflects the quality of that bond. And when they do choose to love someone, it's not to fill a gap, it's to build a bridge between souls, between lives, between truths. Because now they know love isn't the place you go to hide. It's the place where you are seen, where you rise, where you remember. And in the quiet, steady unfolding of that kind of love, something ancient stirs, something sacred. A knowing that says, I am not here to disappear. I am here to become. And anyone who walks beside me must be ready to become, too. Have you ever looked in the mirror during a relationship and thought, where did I go? It's easy to lose yourself when love feels all-consuming, when you start quieting your voice just to keep the peace. This video is a slow, heartfelt exploration of what it means to love without disappearing, inspired by Carl Jung's deep truths about identity, shadow work, and self-worth. If you've ever felt like you're shrinking inside your own story, this one's for you. Let it be a quiet reminder. The right love won't ask you to vanish. If it resonates, share it, subscribe, or just leave a comment. I'd love to hear your story.